Welcome, everyone. Good morning. It's been a while since we all met. Um, First of all, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Diana Helm, just to say a few words. She has been attending all kinds of meetings, very familiar from drinking from a fire hose. So, Commissioner Helm, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. I certainly don't need 10 minutes to talk about myself, but just a quick overview. You guys probably all know me from the Damascus days. I served on city council for like 8 years and then came back as mayor before we disincorporated the city. Um, in the meantime, I ran a business here in Damascus, Terra Casa, and I stayed really involved with the county in a number of ways. In the background, serving on advisory committees, mostly for infrastructure, transportation, sewer, water, and just many advisory committees. I was really involved with the North Clackamas Chamber of Commerce, actually still am, government affairs and public policy team. Just have kind of kept my fingers in it. It's I don't know, it's kind of again the background stuff, but it's kind of all the things that we need to make sure our communities are safe and running well, and that our, you know, charges that we the goodness the rates that we charge our customers are in line, and that we also have a lot of CIPs in place to make sure we're planning for growth. So anyway, I threw my name in the hat for this job, and I thought I knew a lot about Clackamas County, but there's a lot I didn't know. And yes, I'm attending as many meetings as possible, trying to engage with constituents, with other mayors, cities, and just the public in general, just to make sure that I'm getting up to speed on everything I need to know. So I'm excited to be on this committee, and Paul is keeping me up to speed on most everything. But please, as much input as I can get from everyone is really helpful. So great to see all of you, meet all of you. I know most of you, but some of you I don't.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Commissioner Helm, for your introduction. Any questions for Commissioner before we move on? All right. Seeing none, one thing I wanted to mention here is that what's unique about the C4 Metro Group is that, if you have an interested member of your council or group, they can attend this meeting. Everyone can participate in the C4 Metro. The only positions that are somewhat appointed are the co-chairs. So I'm one of the co-chairs, and elected by his cohorts is Mayor Buck. So, Mayor Buck, at this point, I'm going to turn the next agenda item over to you, and I want to let you all know that I'm leaving a little early. So, Mayor Buck, if you could make sure you run the show for majority of the meeting here today.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Savas. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all again. So just to touch briefly on we have JPAC coming up tomorrow on the agenda. We're approving it's on the consent agenda, but a variety of MTIP amendments. They're all related to these kind of like a substantial number of curb cuts that it looks like ODOT's performing on various state highways throughout the region, and it looks like in many of our on ODOT facilities in many of our jurisdictions. So anyway, they're going to debrief, and I think we're going to hear a debrief too on JPAC's a recent junket out to DC, and they'll give a recap, of the never-ending special session, give an update on where things are at, and then we're going to hear a report, just like we are today, on the Portland-Vancouver Area Comprehensive Climate Plan, the kind of feedback and comments on the draft plan they've put together. And so that's what we have going on at JPAC. And with that, I think we're going to start this portion of the meeting off with Trent giving us an update on that DC trip. How was that?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It was pretty good. On the screen, Miles Pengilly was there with me as well. So Miles, Phil, welcome to fill in any gaps that I leave behind here. It was a really good trip. From the region, there was probably 20 to 30 different members of our group from across the region. And some folks had not done that trip before, some folks had, so I think it was kind of a good mix of things. There is, we were able to meet as a group, as a JPAG group, with every member of the Oregon delegation except for one, or at least every member office. Some sent their member, some had votes, and so they sent their staff. We were also and that one that we didn't meet with was Representative or Congressman Cliff Bentz. Was not able to join the group, but I think it was a pretty good discussion with the other members of Congress to come in and talk with us, or their staff to come in and listen to what the group had to share. It was a pretty good on message position from JPAC that the surface reauthorization needs from the federal level are, they would be great if it could marry or match up with any activity that's happening at the state level, which still hasn't happened here in Oregon yet. And it looks like it's not going to happen again today. It's going to get punted again for another week or two. So there's a lot of indecision that's happening right around, or inability to get to a decision point around transportation funding. The message was clear, please be brave in this conversation. Look for those areas of opportunity to keep transportation funding moving forward. It's not a partisan topic. It can be certainly, but like for the most part, everybody needs a road, right? Everybody needs that infrastructure to be in place. So show up, please vote, please look for those areas where you can provide leadership. And then everyone talked about various aspects of how a Surface Reauthorization Act could also play into the region. I-5 Bridge was brought up a lot. That's really interesting. They had a report here, I-5 Bridge did back in July to this group. And so y'all know pretty much the talking point that was there, which is that they're reaching the end of some of their planning and design work. They're getting close to that moment where they're looking to put some shovels in the ground. And so this next year or so is a pretty important moment for them as they transition towards that construction piece, and certainty around the federal dollars that they're getting needs to continue for them to move forward with such a big project. And that's true for anybody that's receiving federal funds. And so I thought the region did a really good job of emphasizing that. I thought there was a really good meeting too with US DOT. The group was able to go into that building and meet with a couple of folks who are Northwest representatives of, I think, the transit program, as well as other highway programs there. It was a good discussion. Their government affairs director was in the room. He happens to be from the West Coast. And so I thought very localized comments from him about being from the West Coast, having family in South Washington, knowing the I-5 corridor, the Portland corridor very well. So deep in the administration, you have somebody there who's familiar with the West Coast, not forgetting about the West Coast, if that's ever a concern. I thought that was a really encouraging message from that particular meeting. But as a group, I thought it went really well. No big action items because you're just there meeting with your delegation and the US DOT. But I think as a message, it was delivered that the Portland region is serious about our infrastructure, is serious about participating in the national economy and national freight movement, national transit needs. So I think it was all there as a group, and everyone was on message.
Okay, that's great. Does anyone have any? Thank you, Trent, for the update. I'm sorry that I couldn't be on the trip with you all this year. Does anyone have any questions? It's a good update. Okay, it looked like a fun time. Yes, Jamie.
Yeah. Trent, do you know what the timeline is for reauthorization?
Sorry, my computer froze for 2 seconds when you started talking, so I missed it. Could you please repeat the question?
Do you know what the timeline is for reauthorization?
It's been moved around a little bit. It's as quick or as soon as Congress wants to mess with it. And right now, Congress is really focused on the budget, just their budget, and whether or not there will be a continuing resolution and how long that continuing resolution will be negotiated. And so that's priority one in Washington, D.C. is how that was communicated. And then while we were there, it sounds like the House chamber and the Senate chamber are at different milestones within their development process. And it sounds, based on the conversation there, that the Senate's a little bit ahead right now within their discussions. And then House T&I is still looking to try to put some of the conversations together around negotiations that are happening at the House T&I committee. a lot of folks feel like it's as much of a bipartisan issue as anything else that happens in Congress. And so I think a lot of members of Congress were really encouraged that some of the norms that you're seeing from Congress in DC right now might not fully apply to the transportation rate authorization efforts. But I think everyone is just, aware of the possibility that it could still be a political game. We were hearing dates such as soon as December, probably January. It could be middle of next year before you see something. So no one was willing to sort of commit to a time window, but everyone was pretty clear that nothing's going to happen until the budget, continuing resolution, or firm budget is resolved.
Thank you. Okay, Miles. Next, Miles is going to give us a little update on things going on at TriMet.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, Miles Pengilly, Government Affairs Director at TriMet. Let me get my screen shared here. Jamie, it looks like I don't have screen sharing
I fixed it.
yet.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Okay, can everyone see my slides okay? Looks like it.
That's looking good.
Okay. So, normally we come by, TriMet comes in the fall to kind of provide a service update. We want to do something a little different today, which is to talk about probably the last topic that TriMet wants to talk about, which is service changes and service changes in the form of some cuts that TriMet is going to need to be making to service over the course of the next year plus. I think that this is not the first time that a lot of you are hearing about this. We have been dealing with budget challenges and trying to address those budget challenges through the legislative session. Obviously, the special session that was supposed to conclude today has been postponed again until later this month. And in any event, compared to the revenue that TriMet was seeking, and it looked like transit providers across the state would receive from the transportation package in the regular session, what is being proposed in the special session is now a fraction of that. And so, as we announced in late July, we are unfortunately going to be exploring making cuts to service, and that process will officially roll out on on September 24th. So, I wanted to kind of ground where we are now with some recent history. You all remember us coming to present on Forward Together 1.0, which was our financially constrained service improvement concept. This is something that we did kind of in the wake of the pandemic, driven by data, and really looking at how can we improve our service with the existing budget that we have to better meet the needs of the communities that we serve, with all the changing commute patterns in a post-COVID world. And so what that looked like was trying to get more service to more jobs. And so you saw, increased service on weekends, off-peak commuting hours, for people who work in retail, people working swing shifts, to areas like industrial areas on North Lombard, in Portland, in Troutdale, to Clackamas Town Center, North Industrial area of Hillsborough, stuff like that. And also trying to meet need and demand where it was holding strong during the pandemic. We saw a lot of our lines, such as express commuter lines into downtown Portland, really drop ridership. We saw other lines where ridership didn't really drop at all during and in the wake of the pandemic. And so, we have already implemented a lot of those improvements that we identified in that work. But one of the first changes is that further service improvements that are slated and Forward Together are on hold indefinitely due to our current budget situation. And as a reminder, here's a snapshot of the service improvements completed in Clackamas County since 2023. More service on line 70 and line 35. We added service to Clackamas County Lake Road Health Center, new service between Westland and Lake Oswego, and new service connecting Oregon City to Tualatin as well. So we had talked about before, as we were rolling out Forward Together, kind of 3 stages of a plan. Forward Together 1.0, which is that income or revenue constrained service improvement plan I just talked about. Forward Together 2.0, which was a longer planning exercise for where we wanted to go longer term with transit improvements across the region, assuming a reality or a future where we would actually have more revenue to be able to spend on transit service. And then we've also talked to you all about our FX system plan. FX is our frequent express bus rapid transit service, and looking at beyond the current route along Division and the planned projects which are moving forward on 82nd Avenue and on TV Highway in Washington County. Where would be those next corridors for bus rapid transit? And we are kind of merging our forward-looking planning efforts from those 3 stages into Forward Together, the road ahead. And so while we are not canceling any plans insofar as a lot of the valuable work that has been done, a lot of the engagement has been done about where should those improvements go in the future. Again, just because of our revenue situation, executing those plans and moving those on to the next stage is unfortunately excuse me, is unfortunately also on hold. I know we've talked to a lot of you about this. We are facing a number of increased costs. 53% overall. The cost of our service has increased 53% over the last 5 years. That's because of labor. That's because of extensive investments we've made in safety and security. And a lot of the things that you all are seeing in your local governments, just increased facility costs, equipment costs, even things like contractors and software. We also TriMet is not getting as much fare revenue as we were before the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the budget shortfalls that we were facing that we were hoping would be addressed by an increase in the employee payroll tax that funds the STIF program have not materialized. To give you an idea, what is being proposed now in this amended special session bill, which would increase the STIF for 2 years and then sunset that increase after 2 years, will generate for TriMet about 5% of the revenue over the next 15 years that was proposed originally for the special session, and about 2.5% of the revenue that was proposed in the regular session transportation package. And so, we are facing essentially a $300 million annual gap between our costs and our revenues. And TriMet is committed to closing that budget gap within 3 years in order to be financially sustainable and put our agency in a more stable place moving forward. And so, I just want to emphasize that providing safe and reliable transit is our core mission. The absolute last thing that TriMet wants to do is to cut service. And it has been a painful conversation for us to undertake looking into service cuts. We are looking everywhere we can to minimize cuts to service. And so our first step will be to cut about $93 million in administrative expenses over the last several years, or excuse me, over the next several years. But that, with the annual gap being about $300 million, even cutting $93 million a year in administrative expenses without additional revenue leaves about a $207 million gap that we still need to fill. And so we are looking at cutting service. We will be launching a comprehensive community engagement process starting on September 24th to help determine what the right mix of service cuts is that are going to minimize impacts on the community we serve. You can see kind of the high level timeline of that outreach and when those cuts are going to take place. We're making very focused cuts in November of 2025. Those cuts are going to be mostly, reductions in frequency of service really early in the morning, late in the evening. We're not taking away any service or altering lines like that. And then we will be, so this initial round of outreach is going to be looking at different types of service cuts that TriMet can do. Do people want us to, reduce frequency, reduce the reach of routes? We're going to have a menu and as well as virtual open houses and a survey that people can do to rank the types of service cuts that they think we should make. Like I said, we'll be making some of those initial very targeted cuts in November. Then in January, we are going to be going out with a more specific list of proposed cuts where we're talking about specific lines that are up for consideration, different combination of cuts, be it of frequency, be it of routes, and combinations thereof that will get us to, the balanced budget that we need. And those would be the specific cuts that would take place at the end of 2026. And so that's kind of what our outreach process will look like here for the next 6 months or so. We will be doing another round of what we call very focused cuts where we're not taking anything away, but reducing frequency and off-peak hours in March of 2026. And then, like I said, the first round of significant cuts that we're getting feedback on in September, and then more detailed feedback on next spring would actually take place at the end of 2026. And so, we are going to continue to look at other ways to generate revenue. Obviously, the conversation about transportation funding at the state legislature is not over, and whatever comes of the special session here at the end of this month, we're going to continue to push for sustainable ongoing transit funding in the 2027 session. That will determine whether there are further cuts needed beyond what we're looking at in winter of 2026. But we are looking at least about a 10% service cut here taking place in a little over a year from now. And that would be kind of scaled out over the next couple of years. I know this is not good news. We're sorry to be sharing this news. We're sorry that we are in this position. But we obviously do want to keep you all informed. Like I said, we're going to be launching this outreach process, including a detailed web page on September 24th. And we're really going to be looking to all of you as leaders across the region to help us share this information with your constituents, making sure they know that this is happening and that they have the opportunity to engage in this process and make their voices heard as we look at the best path forward here as we have to undergo these cuts. So happy to take any questions that you all have. I'm happy to be in touch with you individually, but Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, Miles, well, appreciate your presence here today and sharing, what I think a lot of us have heard. I know that, John Sarah is normally our representative. I know you're filling in his shoes, so it's appreciated that again, um, some of this work is not what you normally do, and but also I think that you and I, Trent, and others, started a journey here about a year ago on trying to get regional coordination and things like that settled. And so for me, it's been, of all my 15 years as a commissioner and over 25 years in the community, at least the last 12 months has been quite the ride with information. And so I'm going to be respectful and diplomatic. So this is nothing personal, but you know, it's obviously we're miles away from parity in this region when it comes to transit service, right? And I think that when surveys are done, and you don't have parity, then the input and the volume of input, I don't know how you know, disaggregate that in a way that you're getting an equitable regional voice. Obviously, where you have service and you have customers and lines, you're going to get a lot of support, and you're going to have a lot of you obviously have ridership. So when people reply to the survey, in an area that's rich with service, and rich with customers compared to an area like Clackamas County, who is on quite the diet, so to speak, it doesn't have very much. You're going to get less voice from us, right? So I don't know how that's disaggregated, but I just want to say it feels like a roller coaster. It was not that long ago when um, literally a year ago, we weren't even close to a conversation like this, right? We knew that there was going to be a legislative package. I expected a small increase in the ask for transit. Um, but I was stunned in April to learn that the ask was fivefold of what I think a lot of us ever anticipated, right? Um, so looking at, and I wanted to say thank you to Sam DeSue for at least giving me an opportunity and probably others too, to kind of have a discussion with your finance folks. But, your TriMet is probably the envy of the governments with so much money, unrestricted funds, hundreds of millions of dollars that are there. And to me, I think there's some obvious things that can be done to avoid cuts, such as maybe stalling off some of the capital investments that are, I'm not saying O&M, I'm just saying capital investments, that you have on the books, maybe raising fares, right? So I mean there's a number of things that monetarily and fiscally, it seems the responsible thing to do would be to make some adjustments. But I just want to say this. I don't have a question here, but I just want to say this. This is actually an opportunity to bring parity to I know you're not going to get there, but you could offer up parity. If the cuts could be in areas where maybe frequency is reduced, but you're still got coverage, and then help out areas that are not getting much, like Clackamas County. That's just a suggestion. Thank you. No response needed.
Thank you, Commissioner Savis. Mayor Milch.
Um, I think a lot of us experience that, whether it's the local city level, school districts, state government, when the public hears there's a shortage of funding, the first thing they say is, well, you're overloaded at the top, too much administration cost, and that's their first solution. So I'm glad to see that you've acknowledged that you can get about 31% of this gap met by some administrative cuts, and no one ever wants to see it. You might be talking about your own job, Miles. I don't know, but it's unfortunate that yeah, but it's good that at least you're acknowledging that part of it. But there's still a gap. I get concerned that we see a spiraling as we make these cuts, because somebody who chose at one time to live close to a frequent transit route that becomes no longer frequent might say, well, I need to get a car now. And then once they have a car, even if service returns, they might say, well, it's still easier to take my car than it is to use the service. So I hope we can reverse this trend and get people back on board, and and that the ridership will impact the fare revenue, because I know that's a big part of your budget. I don't know how it compares to the revenue you get from payroll tax, But anything that reduces ridership and fare revenue obviously doesn't have a positive impact in reducing this. So we've got to get it going the other direction. And thank you for all your strategizing on this.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and absolutely agree. I would say that the these challenges with budget shortfalls are being experienced by about two-thirds of transit agencies in Oregon, and this is a national issue right now. I think most publicly probably with SEPTA in the Philadelphia area, and um, what we are trying to handle on this problem and get our expenditures back in line with where our revenues are before this gets out of hand. And so the goal here, as I said, is to bring our expenditures back in line with our revenues in the next 3 years and get our budget balanced, so it's not affecting our bond rating, so that we are able to stabilize, not make further cuts, and be strategic about making sure that with the sustainable budget that we have, that we are continuing to be nimble and make the best choices about where to prioritize service with that new level of revenue. So, and Commissioner Savas, to your comment, we will be looking at a fare increase here in the next couple of years as well, as we look to address this issue. Obviously, the balance there, as always, is making sure that our service is affordable to everybody, at the same time that we are trying to make sure that we're not cutting any more service than we absolutely have to.
Thanks, Miles. Counselor Lewis, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. And I am, I guess, a little distressed that we keep talking about the legislature's increase in funding, because their increase in funding sunsets so quickly that it's not even really worth modeling off of. Because if you're trying to build something that's sustainable, more than 2 years is necessary. So I guess I would look at the setup of this package as really setting us up to fail, because at the end of the day, consumers, constituents, riders will say, look, you got help right as you're making cuts. And we need to really communicate the sunset and the fact that our state legislature has never been overly invested in leadership on transit issues, even though we have big and small transit districts across the state that are in crisis. Early morning service cuts are going to be painful to hear about, not because I ever use them, but because those that do need to get on a bus at 4 a.m., it's because they're going to work. They're not just going out to meet a friend for coffee at 4 a.m., right? So I think we should have a clear list of priorities and values about who we serve best, even after these cuts. And I think it has to come down to workers, low wage workers, workers who have long commutes, workers who are going through other things in this economy right now, who we need to prioritize. So I'm glad to hear that you are going to be doing the survey. I just think that in addition to the types of cuts, it's going to be interesting for policymakers not only to think about the tool that we're using, but the impacts that we're choosing. Because whatever cut we make will have an impact. Let's maybe up front say what kind of impact is acceptable and what kind of impact is not acceptable. And I think that's something this body can do, as well as the TriMet board, as well as TriMet leadership, as we have these conversations in the next 6 months.
Yeah, thank you, Counselor. Those comments are really well taken. And as far as the legislative funding being for such a short period of time as to not be able to plan around, I mean, that is the case. With the current 2-year sunset that we're looking at, we essentially have to move forward with making cuts and balancing our budget without assuming any additional ongoing revenue, just because we can only expect that revenue for 2 years. So obviously, we're grateful for any funding. It all helps, but I do want to underscore how big the difference is between a permanent stiff increase and one that's only lasting for 2 years in terms of what it does and doesn't do for our operations budget. And you know, your point is really well taken. We absolutely, you know, it is in our direction from our board one of the things that we have to prioritize in service is providing service where need is the highest. We have a 10-point equity index that we use to identify where need is in the region, you know, on the basis of income, on the basis of race and ethnicity, on the basis of English as a second language, a number of different factors. And so that will absolutely be a huge input into where and how we decide to cut. You know, as we were just talking about with Forward Together 1.0, we're trying to make it easier for more people to get to work, and people beyond, you know, white collar jobs and people who are commuting downtown during rush hour. And so we don't want to lose those gains, even as we're having to make some service cuts here over the next year plus.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson, please go ahead.
Thanks for coming here today, Miles. I have a few things to touch on. I'll start with the legislature. While it's unfortunate to see that these funds are being sunset in 2 years, I feel a sense from a community movement there. And as challenging as it can be to budget on a limited fixed increase, I think that I know that in the Democratic caucus, there's a desire to see these funds institutionalized and a real sense of resentment that this sunset provision had to be added. And so I think that there is opportunity going forward. I think that, like Councillor Lewis was alluding to, this is a across the state issue. And I think it's really important in the next 2 years for rural service providers to be able to show just how important these services are in their communities. Because this ended up being a partisan issue when I really don't think that it had to be. I think one of my most surprising moments was when I was talking to Paul Evans, who said, you know, I wish we could go higher on the stiff increase because I just heard from my local service provider how important these funds are and what's happening here. I think that when people see this need, really understand it, they realize how important these stiff dollars are. As someone who rides TriMet just about weekly, I will say the work that you all have done on safety is incredibly important. And as you think about areas to pull back on, I really don't think that that is one that we can pull back on. It is uncomfortable to be on a max line when there are people who are clearly under the influence, people who are using, people who just are not exemplifying pro-social behavior. And having your officers there has a marked impact on the people that I ride with, makes me feel more comfortable, and I think will lead to increased ridership that we need to financially stabilize TriMet services. So I think those services are really important. I appreciate the work that you've done. I've seen it in the state legislature, the advocacy that you've done to enable TriMet to really lean into safety, and I think that charge is really important. The last thing that I'll say that's more of a question to you, kind of to Commissioner Savis's point, Clackamas County might not have the robust numbers right now that you would have used to give us the service that we would want. But Clackamas County is the fastest growing county in the metro area, and we're growing in ways that necessitate more transit service. In Milwaukee, we just had a conversation last night about reducing STCs near transit lines. We're having further conversations about where do we want to anticipate more growth. We don't have a UGB to expand in. And so as we add infill development, we've been talking about allowing growth to happen more near transit lines. And we have CFEC rules that require no parking minimums next to transit lines. And so my question here is, with all of this push to develop towards transit, and even Milwaukee going above and beyond to further incentivize development near transit, is that type of growth going to be accounted for in your projections? I would hate to bank so much as a city on transit to subsidize or make possible new growth, and that transit then to be pulled back from the developers, the people, all the folks who are relying on this.
Yeah, thank you for those questions, Counselor, and or for those comments. And I think that's a really good question. I'm happy to hear that the city of Milwaukee is doing that. Certainly, I have talked with several of you about, things that cities can be doing. Obviously, you can't fundamentally overhaul some of your infrastructure design, but what are policies that can be implemented that make a neighborhood or make an area more conducive to transit? And we are always grateful for that. We want to make sure that is being rewarded. To be honest, I don't know how policies such as reducing SDCs near transit lines may be factored into some of these decisions about service cuts and planning decisions that TriMet will be making. So I would like the opportunity to talk to our planning team about that and follow up with you rather than just give some wild conjecture, but I will say I think that's a really good point, and something that we want to make sure is factoring into this conversation.
Counselor Lewis, yeah, follow up.
I don't have a follow-up on that exact thread. Can I ask a different question?
Of course.
Okay. So TriMet just did a fare increase 2 years ago. You noted that there's a likely fare increase coming up. I think that when we talk about fare increases, the first thing we always talk about is the honored citizen and low income fare programs and how there are backstops so that raising the fares is still equitable. That said, if fares are dropping as a portion of revenue, is it possible for us to figure out, obviously that means there are fewer people boarding the bus, like I get that. But are we able to find out why? Which kinds of fares? I would suspect we probably have maintained or sustained revenues from people on those reduced fares. My gut is that we're probably losing the largest amount from employee passes, since either large companies are no longer giving that benefit or their per capita regular use is such that those are stinking deals for them because they give them out and nobody ever takes that bus. But I think as we're talking about fare increases, it's important to figure out where our fare revenue is coming from, not by geography, but by type of fare, and really figure out if we're continuing to load on our increase where we're seeing the least gain anyway, and we need to actually re-examine how fares work, because fares are an important part of making sure that we have robust and good service, but there are plenty of other ways for us to think about local revenues going into the system.
Yeah, I thank you, Counselor Lewis. I think that's a good point, and that's a good idea. And quite frankly, we're going to be looking at increasing fares because, like I said, we want to be pulling every lever. We want to show that we are trying to, make administrative cuts everywhere we can, and increase revenue where we can, in ways that avoid cutting service, however we can. But on the scale of the budget deficit that we're talking about, a fare increase is at least a modest fare increase, is not going to dig us out of a financial hole that we're in. And so I think we do want to make sure that, while we want to continue to provide good transit for people going to work and making sure that that's an amenity that's available to employers, that we don't want to overly burden some of the people who rely on our Honor Citizen program. When we increased our standard fare 2 years ago by 30 cents, we increased the Honored Citizen fare by 15 cents. So I think some of those ideas absolutely merit looking into. And while none of these decisions have been made, my guess is that you would see something again where you're not seeing the honored citizen fare increase by the same amount that you would see a regular fare increase.
Miles, and maybe this is for this, I don't want to put you in this awkward position here, but one group or entity that seems to kind of always be missing from this conversation is like the TriMet board, and I don't know, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way that, I mean, you guys are great, you, John, but that we only ever talk to government affairs staff at the meetings. Like, where is our actual community representation in these conversations? I've never seen the Clackamas County's TriMet person at a meeting ever, for 10 years of public service. So I don't know if I don't expect you to carry that message back, but I don't know if others here feel the same way. But it's just awkward that honestly, I think it puts you guys in a tough situation, especially when we're in a, challenging financial situation. And, thinking back to the pandemic, I mean, it seemed like the expectation was that the ridership was going to come back, right? I mean, that was always the ridership's going to come back. It's down now and it's going to come back, but obviously it has not ever come back. And so now we're talking about these tax increases, not to add service, but just to continue the same service or less service. And that's a tough sell. And I really think TriMet's going to have to think about how you address that in the communities that are subsidizing the system, that have very low ridership but are being asked to pay even more. Like, what? It just doesn't seem like it's a tough sell in those areas without any kind of creative thinking to say, what are those communities going to get from this? It just can't be less. I mean, what do you tell those employees that are paying more payroll? I mean, we're talking about low fare. What do you tell the employees who are paying more? And not getting any service. So, I mean, those are my concerns, but I think it really would be helpful if we had the folks who are representing us on the TriMet board participate in these conversations. But we're kind of short on time. Commissioner Savas and Mayor O'Neill could be quick. Can we let Mayor O'Neill go because he hasn't gone yet?
Sure.
Thank you. Miles, just quick comments on behalf of SMART and the city of Wilson. We're sorry that TriMet's going through these. I also want to thank you. It's more of a comment for the recent exchanges that you have had with the city of Wilsonville. I hope that dialogue continues. I think I'd be interested to know if the ridership issues are still impacted by COVID-19. I know some employers are requiring more and more people to come back to work. So we have someone in my household is being told now that they have to come back to work. And I wonder if those changes over time will develop in more ridership.
Yeah, thank you for the question and that, Mayor O'Neill. I wish that we had a crystal ball to know that for sure. It would certainly make our planning and forecasting easier. I would say, ridership has recovered tremendously since the height of the pandemic. I think we're up about 63% since the height of the pandemic. We're up, I think, 4 or 5% this year over last year. So it is recovering. We are also still hovering around 70% of pre-pandemic ridership. And so, yes, it is recovering. No, it is not back to where it was. I think it will continue to recover. I think what we also see kind of anecdotally is there are a lot of people who, they're working a hybrid schedule. So they would take the max to work when they had to commute in and pay for parking 5 days a week or whatever. Now they're coming into the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week. I'll drive and pay to park in the garage because I'm only doing it a couple days a week. And I think that is where kind of that gap persists. I think as more and more people are forced to come back to the office, that will change. But I think that, we need to continue to be nimble and be looking at where that demand it has held steady or demand is increasing. And Mayor Buck, to your point, if there are areas where we are not providing enough service, where, even if we don't have the budget to be increasing service, where we continue to shift service around to better serving the needs of people, and better serving where we're finding that demand in the Portland metro area.
On 2 miles, I think we might just need to be flexible with the stiff dollars. We can't just be we can't just be on this fixed route thing in every community. I mean, stiff was supposed to be additive, right? It wasn't supposed to supplement reduced fares or the lack of recovery from COVID. I mean, so that's the thing is like now stiff is just becoming, well, let's just increase the stiff. It was supposed to enhance service in areas that didn't have service. And now it's just becoming an additional subsidy for the core of TriMet service area. And so that's the rub in areas that don't have good service, is that it's not what the stiff was intended for, really, initially. That's not how it was sold. So I think we got to just think outside the fixed route box. And how do we direct some of these stiff dollars outside transit agencies to communities that just need some other ways to move their residents around? And that could help with the overall efficiency of the system. If we think, outside just TriMet as an organization, but as a broader system of moving people around, how can we adjust, but Commissioner Savas, because I'm so sorry. I'm glad we've had the time to talk on the topic, but we gotta move.
Yeah, we're clearly very passionate about this, and I might be the old guy in the room here, but Miles, I'm going to give you my 25 years of asking. I appreciate Mayor Buck bringing up the TriMet board. I've been approaching members of the TriMet board. I've been approaching TriMet, asking. Our community's been asking. The county's been asking for 25 years, during tough times, during good times. And the response has been the same. Very little has changed. And I think we have to look at, frankly, there's something wrong with this paradigm, right? It's amazing sometimes that the TriMet board is so disconnected from us and from our problem. And it seems to be more, Portland centric, I guess, if you will. I'm not picking on our neighbors to the north or to the west. But the paradigm has got to change. There's never a reason that there's always a reason we can't get service. But I still want to go back to, if there's no willingness to adjust the parity, I'd like to see more study and analysis on frequency. I think that might be the easiest thing, but it shouldn't be about just looking for more revenue. It ought to be looking at where are we fat? What are ways of cutting cost? And I think there's some extravagant expenditures that you have in your capital plan that ought to be just put on pause, put on the shelf. You can't go forward with that baked into your budget. These huge capital expenditures that are again, they're not as needed as basic service. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Savas. Miles, thank you very much for being here with us this morning. You mentioned the survey, just to close this out. Where should we be looking for that? We want to help push that out to our folks.
Yeah, thank you. We will be doing a massive email outreach as soon as that goes live. I think that that will be going out to a lot of elected leaders across the region. I can also make sure that Trent and Jamie have that, so they can help push that out to this group as well. Because we do want to make sure that our reach is being multiplied by all of the connections that you all have with your constituents throughout the region. So always appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. Appreciate your feedback. I hope that you all will be engaged in this process and this conversation over the next year. Obviously, it's not just an opportunity for your constituents to make their voices heard, but expect that the voices of elected leaders in Clackamas County and throughout the region are going to be a big piece of this conversation, as well as we try to find the best of several difficult paths forward. So, just appreciate the time and the conversation.
Thank you, Miles. I appreciate you. Okay. We are going to move on to the Metro Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. Elliot Rose, I see you here. Thank you for your patience. If you could cut your presentation in half, that would be great. Sorry to have to rush you through. We're just a little behind. We'll let you get right to it. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Chair Buck, can you just remind me how much am I trying to wrap it up by 8:35?
Hey, no, 8:45.
All right, we'll try to wrap up the slides by 8:35 so we get to discussion. Thank you so much. I'll do my best. All right, hello, C4 Metro. My name is Elliot Rose. I'm a senior transportation planner at Metro, and I'm here to talk with you about the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, which is, as the name suggests, the most comprehensive climate action plan the region has ever produced. Metro's working on this plan through funding from a federal grant, and it's been a great opportunity to really look back and get a really big perspective on how we meet our climate goals across all sources of climate pollution in the region. So it's been a while since I've spoken with C4 or CTAC about this work. And so I want to first just kind of start with where we're at. We've been doing this plan for a while. This is the second deliverable under the grant. And so, we've been doing this work and doing the background research and analysis that led into creating this plan ever since August of 2023. And then, we reached a big milestone. I realized I should have said that developed draft plan, that timeline, which should say July 2025 is when we finished. I lopped a year off our process. So after all that background research and work, we got to a point where we were ready to release the plan for public comment. And we did that in August. And we accepted comments from partners and also created an online survey where we got a lot of responses about people's climate priorities and which actions they support governments working on. And so I'm here to report back on what we've heard about the draft plan and get some further feedback on how to best finalize it to meet the region's needs. Talking with a lot of regional technical and policy committees in September so that then we can bring that conversation to Metro Council for discussion in October, and then bring the plan to Metro Council for action in November. Important to mention that although by the requirements of the grant, we have to hand this plan in at the end of the year, this plan will feed into the update of the regional transportation plan that we do, which is, has a lot of requirements for how it addresses climate. And we're trying to use this work to prepare for that work that we do on the regional transportation plan so that we can answer some of the questions that the region's facing about transportation and climate in particular. So now that I've gotten the process out of the way, here's what the plan is. First of all, this plan is framework and guidance. It's not a policy plan. It's a plan that tries to recommend actions that we think that seem to be most effective at reducing climate pollution and benefiting people in a broad variety of ways. Besides that, and offering advice on how to best implement those actions so that Metro and our local partners can use that news in the climate work that they produce, which is widespread throughout the region. The plan includes an inventory of where our climate pollution comes from, projections about how that pollution might change in the future if we didn't take any further action on climate, and targets to reduce our emissions. And then lastly, and this is really the crux of the plan, a set of recommended climate actions that we can lead in the region and that make significant progress toward those climate goals and that also otherwise benefit people in the region. Throughout this process, we've been hearing from lots of folks and considering lots of different types of information as we figure out what actions belong in this plan, and I wanted to briefly describe that process. So we started by reviewing every climate action plan we could find in the region. That includes Clackamas County's draft climate action plan, which was developed in 2023, and looking at what actions they called out. And we created this big list of potential actions we could go on. And then for each of those actions, we assess 3 pieces of information. What are the costs and benefits of this action? That's stuff that we did internally with Metro staff and our consultant team by looking at established methods and plans that described how these different actions would be implemented. We also tried to select actions that address community priorities, drawing both on the outreach that our partners had conducted through their climate action plans, as well as additional surveys and outreach that we've conducted through this process. And lastly, we have a steering group of really excellent technical staff throughout the metro area who work on climate stuff. That includes some great representatives from Clackamas County. And we get together every 2 months with those folks. And these are really folks who have done the work on this stuff, and they know these actions and have been through the fire of trial and error with them. And so they're the ones who we really on to tell us which of these actions are ready for implementation and how to really do implementation right, given all the thorny twists and turns that other folks have encountered in their experience. We consider those 3 actions together, and that's really, and those 3 pieces of information together, and that's how we got to the actions in this plan. They're actions that the numbers tell us are really beneficial and relatively low cost. They're actions that we hear is a high priority for community members in our region, and they're actions that our partners tell us are sensible and ready to go. The plan has 24 different actions, and I'm going to summarize them all briefly here. Those actions are organized into 3 sectors that contribute the majority of the region's climate pollution: transportation, buildings, and food, goods, and services. I'm going to show some information about how these actions stack up. Keep in mind, it's all relative to each other. There's no standard way of grading this. I'm not aware of any objective scale of like climate benefits and costs. This is all just looking at these very different actions relative to each other. When we do that, we see that transportation actions really produce a really big climate benefit. And if you look down at this co-benefits row, a really broad variety of co-benefits for other people. Not a big surprise. We know that transportation projects are often big public projects that affect a variety of people. They last for a long time. And so they really produce a variety of benefits, and those benefits are significant and they last, and those benefits are lasting. The challenge within transportation, as we just discussed in a previous item, is that it's costly. And a big part of what we've been trying to do with this plan is recalibrate our expectations for these transportation actions to the level of resources that we have available today. And that's a conversation that's going to continue as we carry it over into our regional transportation plan. We just had a conversation about, hey, if we have less resources for transit service, how does that affect emissions in the region? That's a question that we're trying to better answer here because it's very important right now, and it's coming up a lot. We may not get to a definitive answer in this plan, but we have steps forward that will enable us to really dig into that when we do the regional transportation plan. On the building side, there's a lot of really great actions that are really widespread, but the difference is that they're mostly implemented by local and state agencies. There's not a lot of regional coordination on buildings. So even though those actions seem really beneficial and often seem really cost effective, there's not a pot of money or a process we can use to make collective decisions about how to move those things forward. And that means it's they feel a little less ready because it's harder to advance them. Last, there's food, goods, and services, which can be really effective at reducing emissions, especially in the Portland region where we have coordinated waste management. It's a little bit more of a mixed picture outside of the metro region. In unincorporated areas, we don't have the same type of coordination around how we manage waste and the stuff we use. And so that means there are fewer opportunities to reduce emissions there. This is a very complex slide that essentially, illustrates that this plan gets us close to reducing emissions to the level that we need to reach both Oregon and Washington's goals, but it doesn't get us all the way there, and further collective action is necessary. So meeting our goals means that we close this gap that I'm trying to mouse over. I hope you can see my cursor between this top dashed green line, which is emissions if we did nothing, and our goals, which are down here in this dashed black line. The actions in the CCAP close that gap by around 25%. The existing state climate policies and programs that we have in both Oregon and Washington. I'm referring to Oregon and Washington because this plan covers the entire metropolitan area, the 7-county metropolitan area. It's a bi-state plan, so Washington's climate policies are also relevant here. Those things that both states are doing to reduce emissions from vehicles, reduce emissions from fuels, reduce emissions from grid energy, those close the gap by another 45%. And then lastly, collective action is needed to close that remaining 30%. And what I mean by that is not just collaboration between local regional governments in the state, but collaborations between the public and private sector and collaboration across multiple states. The reason I say that is because our remaining emissions under this under this approach, all the emissions we're reducing come from electricity and gasoline. Those are two big sources of emissions that are widely used. But there are other sources like natural gas, diesel, the carbon that comes from the food we eat and the stuff we consume. That's harder, that's more challenging to address, especially if we're going to address it in a way without increasing people's costs. And it's that collective action that creates the market for low carbon alternatives to these different products that is really needed to reduce these emissions without imposing additional costs on people. So we released the CCAP for public comment in August. We collected comments through both email and through agency consultation and also through online surveys. I'm just going to briefly share what we've heard so far. First, from our survey findings, we had 181 responses total, 152 as the time I pulled this data. Among the people who took this survey, we see overwhelming support for government action on climate. And we also see majority support for the specific actions that are in this draft climate action plan. I think a critical thing that really stood out to me, and if it was one takeaway for me from this, is that there's majority support among the people we surveyed for every action in the CCAP. And that those actions include some controversial stuff like road pricing. And we know that not everyone feels great about that. I imagine folks in Clackamas County have particular feelings given the way that our MPP was rolled out in Oregon previously. In spite of those concerns, we have a lot of support for doing those actions, provided we do them right. And we get a lot of feedback through this survey about what it means to do different actions right in a way that really benefits everyone, that we're still kind of processing. And I'm looking really forward to sharing out with folks as soon as we kind of actually go down below these numbers and look at the actual comments. As far as the actions, we ask people which actions in this plan they most support. On the building side, people want us to invest in existing buildings over new ones. I discussed the road pricing findings, less supported than other transportation options, but still maybe a surprisingly high level of support. And then when we looked at ways to reduce emissions from food, goods, and services, composting widely supported, followed by reusing and preventing carbon-intensive waste from products like electronics and clothing. There's also a lot of comments we received from agency partners and community partners about details of this plan. I'm going to move through those quickly so we can get to discussion. I'm sorry I haven't compressed my slides as much as I hoped to. I mentioned the timeline here. We're collecting feedback on the draft plan this month from technical and policy committees across the region. Then we're going to discuss that with our climate partners forum. Folks in this room, many of these agencies I'm seeing represented are on that climate partners forum. So if you want to make sure that you're represented on that when we dig into the feedback we've heard with that technical steering group, I'll drop my email in the chat afterward, and you can reach out to me if you want to make sure that you're represented at that meeting, because that's something that's open to any agency partner in the metro area. Then we have Metro Council discussing the feedback we've heard in October and taking action on endorsing the final CCAP via resolution on November 13th. So curious what feedback you have about the plan, and I'm sorry to have to breeze through this so quickly, but looking forward to answer any questions folks have.
Looks like you're getting off easy, Elliot. Oh, Councilor Lewis.
Sure. I just wanted to thank Elliot for being here. I think that the work of this plan and planning process was made possible because of a federal grant. And it's important to really make the best use of this additional resource that we have right now for planning, even if implementation is going to cost additional funds that are not yet secure. I'm particularly excited, obviously, about the work that can be done in the transit realm, but I'm really just wanting to lift up the solid waste, garbage, recycling, compost, reuse element that is incorporated in this plan. And, you know, it's not where people naturally gravitate their energy, but I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit still left there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Anderson.
This might be a smaller thing, Elliot, but you mentioned that 30% of our climate goals are going to have to come from behavior changes in the private sector and individuals' lives and in partnerships, governments like our metro. I wonder what type of behavior changes you're baking into your policy here for metro to adopt. I always find it kind of like ironic that we ask that there are some serious changes if we want to meet these climate goals that we're asking of everyday people. Driving less is a challenge in our current infrastructure. You just heard our long discussion about how we're not happy with our transit system out here. If we want to eat less meat, that is a choice. A lot of good meat dishes, high carbon impacts, taste amazing. You're asking for a sacrifice there. You're asking for sacrifices in people's daily lives, and I don't see government stepping up to do those things as well. So are you including those behavior changes? Are you holding our governments accountable to do those behavior changes first before we ask that of individual citizens?
Thank you so much for that question, Councilor Anderson. You got me worried that I maybe miscommunicated something in my rush to get this information out quickly. We're actually really trying not to rely on behavior changes in this plan. And that's because the feedback I'm getting from people very clearly tells me that it suggests strongly to me that won't work. Where if you just ask people to spend extra money on, or change their everyday behaviors without giving them any incentive to do that, just out of the goodness of their hearts, they don't make those changes because you're asking them, and people tell us that very clearly. I want you to do something about the climate governments. I'm not going to play if you're just asking me to spend more money or change my habits to benefit things. So when I talk about collective actions, what I mean is that we need to see participation across multiple states and between public and private sector to enable people to make those behavior changes without having an additional cost. And I guess an example here that I can think of is like what we've done with solar panels in the past. It's expensive to put solar panels on your home if you don't get help with that. But when we have collaboration where the federal government and state governments are offering incentives for that, and there's also funding for collaborative research and development efforts among the private sector to bring down the cost of that technology, and local governments are offering permitting incentives for that. All of a sudden, we stack a bunch of incentives that enable someone to put solar panels on their home without incurring a ton of extra costs. And so what we were trying to say with that slide that you're responding to is we need that level of collaboration, multi-state, multi-sector, with respect to the food we eat, the diesel we consume, and natural gas in order to create the landscape where we have people being able to make the climate-friendly choice without paying extra money or taking on extra inconvenience. I'm sorry that wasn't clear.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. just a little comment, no response, Elliot, needed, but I just want to, I've been in the air quality on the engineering and development and side for since I was a teenager, actually. So, back when all these standards were set for air quality in the Portland metro region and around the country, all the metro areas, attainment was based on carbon monoxide, monoxide, not dioxide. So the world has changed around us, and we've been in attainment in the Portland metro region for a long time. And and I know that, from attending meetings starting in the 90s on the public side, it's very clear that behavior change was a strategy. And I would say that it hasn't really worked out in really behavior change. What has really got us into attainment is technology changes, engineering changes. And many, many years ago, what I brought to the table at JPAC was we need to embrace hydrogen. There's hydrogen and there's green hydrogen. There's a lot of ways of taking renewable energy and converting that to hydrogen for storage and then converting that. I mean, California is doing it. I know that right now with the uncertainty at the federal level, there may or may not be as much robust venture capital to put into hydrogen. But I think we have to look at technology, frankly, to move people. I don't think that behavior change is really netted any real result. And if it is, where's it showing up at? Marginally in, bike ped, sure. Marginally in transit, sure. But the change we need and to meet at least the goals we've set for ourselves, I don't think that's in our horizon. That's just a comment. All right. I don't know if Mayor Buck's still around, but I need to leave here shortly. So, Mayor Milch, would you like to take over?
I see Mayor Buck's name still on the screen, so he may have just stepped away temporarily. But I believe the next item on the agenda is that the report from Team TPAC. I'm scrolling down my packet. So who's here to report on that?
Mayor Buck is back. So
Sorry, guys, I had a hearing on the phone. Sorry, I'm back. And Will Farley is here from Lake Oswego. Will, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks for giving us the TPAC update.
Good morning, councilors, mayors, and commissioners. TPAC update, I'll keep it really brief. We had a meeting on September 5th. It was hybrid with some people online, some people in person. It was good to see a lot of people back in the room. We had a fatal crash update that showed 6 crashes in Clackamas County, as well as some of the improvements going around in the region to improve safety, including ODOT investing about $23 million in safety improvements on Highway 224. Southwest Regional Transportation Council adopted Clark County's first transportation safety action plan, and PBOT launched a $50,000 bike bus wayfinding pilot project, all to improve safety in our region. Going into our actual meeting, we had a resolution to modify 13 projects in the MTIP to either add, amend, or cancel them. Doing some little housekeeping there. We had the similar presentation that Elliot gave about the comprehensive climate action plan. And then we had a discussion about the state review of the Metro's greenhouse gas reduction target rules. Jeff, anything else that we want to touch on?
Appreciate that. As the only other things in our packet there were what Elliot just spoke on, and then also a similar lens from the state. So we probably don't need to go into too much detail there, but happy to take any thoughts you have. And I'll also be attending that meeting Elliot referenced coming up at the end of the month for CCAP. So happy to kind of been taking notes today, and we'll carry that forward into that meeting as well.
Did TPAC have any comments, concerns about those MTIP amendments for the curb cuts?
Not drastic, no. ODOT did, basically does through those provides a lot of numerical, there's a lot of curb ramps they touch there in different regions. And one thing they did follow up on a little bit afterwards was helping to show a little more progress towards the total picture. And so maybe that's something we can try to bring back for this group in next month's packet. It's just a little more of that snapshot of how many curb ramps they do and over time to help you track that, if that's an interest item for you.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Will and Jeff? No? Okay, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. MPAC, which is next week. We have they haven't published the agenda yet, but looking at their future agenda, looks like there's going to be talking about Metro's future vision, which we've all heard about before, cooling corridors, an update to the supportive housing services, kind of a funding update there, and then the regional housing coordination strategy, which of course we've been engaged on as well. So it looks like that's what's coming up at MPAC. All right. Okay. And I think that's it for the agenda, Jamie. Yes.
Oh, we have one more topic, which is the MTAC update from Laura Turway.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Laura. Good morning.
Morning. Our last MTAC meeting was July 16th. We talked about climate action plan, regional housing coordination strategy, so I'm not going to talk about those. We did get an update from Metro on the Metro Service District annexation. So there was a House Bill 2356 this last session where we have land that's in the UGB but outside the Metro Service District. And currently you have to annex into a city and you also have to annex into the Metro Service District if you're not in it. This House bill allows that annexation to the Metro Service District to happen with the annexation to a jurisdiction, which is great, much more efficient. We appreciate that. It's only forward looking, not backwards looking. So if you have land within our jurisdictions that are not within the Metro Service District, you still have to do that ideally before development happens. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it. Any questions? Anyone? Questions? MTech? No? Okay. Okay. All right. I guess that's it, unless anyone has anything else. Mayor Milch.
I think if I heard a common theme today, it was make good use of what we currently have instead of trying to build too much more. That was, it came through from the Metro report. I know there's a lot of buildings in downtown Portland and maybe in some of our other cities that are not used as much as they were pre-COVID. They could be housing, they could restore some business development. We have a lot of capital improvement projects going forward, which is always positive for any kind of, but the more infrastructure you have, the more you have to maintain. So, maybe temporarily until we get our financial situation sorted out. For right now, it's just like at the local level. People join these groups called Buy Nothing, where they trade things that they already have, so they're not investing in too much new stuff. And maybe that'll guide us for a little while until we can kind of get back on track.
Yeah, it's well said. Good point. I like that. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a great day. We are adjourned. We'll see you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.